Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
All right, gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scot McKay. You can find me on just about every social media platform at Scot McKay, SCOTMCKAY, 1T and Scott, with the exception of Instagram, where I'm Real Scot McKay, at Real Scot McKay, that is. The website, as always, is mountaintoppodcast.com. And gentlemen, those of you who are already in on our Facebook group, which is the Mountaintop Summit, know how much fun it is. This is not another one of those men's group where we agonize about everything and get unsolicited advice from people who have no idea what they're doing and who are sometimes just as angry and misguided themselves giving the advice. Nah, we're stepping down from that and we're having a little bit of fun actually being a man. Go figure. All of that's there for you at Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. If you're not a member already, you should be. With me today is a new friend of mine. He's a good guy. I've already been a guest on his podcast, actually, with my lovely bride, Emily, by my side, as per usual. His podcast has the auspicious title of How to Split a Toaster, and it's about divorce stories, and that's kind of a creative way to talk about it. What my guest, Seth Nelson, didn't hear from me is that in my divorce with my first wife, she and I actually argued over a wok that costs probably $30 at Walmart. So, I mean, that just tells you how crazy it is. It's like you really do sometimes get down to splitting a toaster. But enough about me. My guest is indeed named Seth Nelson, Esquire. I added the Esquire myself just because I'm a Bill and Ted fan. But he is a divorce lawyer, so he's earned that Esquire title behind his name, fair and square. He is from NLG Divorce and Family Law. And as you guys all know, we've had at least two divorce lawyers on this podcast before. So I figured we're going to mix things up a little. And here's exactly how we're going to do that. As it turns out, my new friend Seth Nelson is not only a divorce lawyer, he has been divorced himself. And guess what? He just recently got remarried. So the topic du jour, if you will, is dating after divorce and getting married again, along with that, from a divorce lawyer himself. Seth Nelson, welcome to the program, man.
Scott, so excited to be here.
This has got to be a fun conversation, or we're not doing it right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And my only two goals for this conversation is, one, to make sure that your listeners hopefully have some good takeaways to help them while they're out there back in the field, dating again, and looking for a positive, healthy relationship, which a lot of us were not in our first marriages.
For sure.
And two, to not have my current wife listen to the show and decide to divorce me.
Are we going to get into some of the prurient details of what happened pre-second marriage? Is that what's going to go on here, Seth?
We are. Look, everything's on the table. Whatever you ask me, Scott, I'm going to answer. But I'm a lawyer, so I can talk out of both sides of my mouth.
Ah, very good. Well, you know, perhaps unbeknownst to this audience, I'm somewhat selective in the episodes I listen to with my wife, although I try to make it a point that I'm not going to disclose anything, especially in a way that would throw her under the bus or embarrass her in any way, that I wouldn't ever say with her, you know, sitting right next to me. But man, I tell you what, she's pretty unoffendable. So we've had some pretty hairy moments on these podcasts talking about sex, talking about dating and old war stories. So you can feel free to let the fur fly or to hold your cards close to your chest, whichever lame cliche you want to adhere to most. I'm all in, man.
Yeah, it will flow easily. Most of what I say in front of my wife, she goes, "I can't believe you said that." And I say, "Have we just met?" And I say that, "Have we just met?" in all sincerity, because we actually met when I was in the third grade and she was in the fourth.
Oh my goodness. So this is a rekindling of a childhood friendship.
Well, that's a very nice way to say it. I, like everybody else in our school, had a crush on her. She remembered who I was, but at no time did she have a crush on me.
Well, hey, looks like you got it in the end.
That's right. I'm an acquired taste, a long time coming.
Wow. So you knew her in third grade. You had a crush on her then, and she only got better with time, like a fine wine, I'm presuming.
Absolutely.
All right. So how did you two reconnect? Was it on Facebook?
It was not. It's not a Facebook reconnection. It was 13 years ago. I was running for Tampa City Council at the time, and I was networking, being out in the community as much as you can, which is what you do when you run for office. And I was at an event where we ran into each other. And literally, I was going to reintroduce myself. And she goes, Seth, I know who you are. And she says, I'm going through what you went through a few years ago. And my heart just sank for her. I said, I'm so sorry you're going through a divorce. And she goes, no, it's okay. It's mutual. And we started chatting. And she was there with, at the time, her 3-year-old child. Her parents were there. Now, remember, I grew up in the same Jewish community that she did. We went to the same Jewish grade school. We'd go to services at the same synagogue. They had the youth group that we were involved in. So our families knew each other, but we didn't know each other as adults at all. But she literally handed me her phone and said, here, take my phone, put your number in it, so maybe we can hang out. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And at the time, if she was on this show, she would tell you the reason she did that is she thought Seth is the only divorced person I know, and he must have friends. She had no interest in dating me at that time, wouldn't even have considered it. And we just started talking. And the next thing you realize is she's like, oh my God, I don't really know this guy as an adult. And we just certainly hit it off and got to really know each other in a much more deep, intimate way in our conversations that went on for hours. Like high school kids back in the day when high school kids used to talk to each other on the phone.
Yeah,
and
way back in the day now.
Right. And we started dating. And we were together for 13 years. Took a break in there when we couldn't get out of each other's way, and ultimately got married just this past July 4th.
So 13 years of dating.
13 years of dating.
Wow. So both of you were a little gun shy about pulling the trigger, proverbially speaking, on that next marriage, right?
No. She was gun shy 100%. She never felt like she needed to get married. There was no reason, in quotes, to get married.
Especially to a divorce lawyer.
Exactly. But we weren't going to have children together. We weren't going to mix our money or commingle our finances. She didn't need a man, or anyone for that matter, to support her financially, because sometimes that's what happens in marriages. One spouse ends up supporting the other financially. I'm not making a judgment on that. The spouse that stays home could be providing for the family, raising the kids, doing other things. So there was no reason to have, quote unquote, the piece of paper.
Did you recognize her as soon as you saw her?
Oh, yeah, the moment, of course.
From sight?
Yeah.
Can I ask how old she was and how old you were?
Yeah, she's born October of 69, and I was born July of 70. So we're about 8 months apart. So we were 40, 41 right then.
So when was the last time you had seen her before you encountered her at this meeting?
We would run into each other every few years from about 2000 until 2010 when we started dating.
So this wasn't some miracle of circumstance that you recognized her. There wasn't anything really serendipitous there. You'd been running into each other socially for a while.
Yeah, but it would be every few years. So I ran into her in Gainesville, Florida when she happened to be living there and I happened to be going to law school there. I ran into her back in Tampa, Florida after I moved back to Tampa after law school, and she moved back to Tampa after leaving Gainesville. And, there'd be charity events that I would see her at, sometimes with her husband, sometimes with not. But there was never any attraction or anything like that when she was married. Literally it'd be like, hey, how you doing? You meet someone at a cocktail party. You haven't seen them for a few years. You chat for 10, 15 minutes and you go on your way.
For the record, how long were you divorced before you actually got her phone number and started talking?
About 2.5 years.
Okay. So not that long.
No, not long at all. So my son was 5 years old when we started dating, and I got divorced from my son's mother when he was only 2.5.
That's rough.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah, that's about how old my little daughter was when her mother and I were getting divorced. And, they know exactly what's going on.
Oh, it was the worst. one of the worst things that ever happened as a parent is my son was 3 years old and he's in the back seat of the car, strapped into his little car seat. And he says to me, why do these friends, when we go over there, because there were some friends in the neighborhood, why are their parents both there? Because his parents are never in the same house at the same time. And I said, well, because they're married. And he says, do you think you and mommy will ever get married? I said, no, we were married, but we thought it was better for you that we weren't married anymore and we live in different houses. And a crocodile tear came down his cheek and it just broke my heart.
It is. It's heartbreaking because then he's going to blame himself.
Yeah. And I explained to him, like, mom loves him, dad loves him. We're always a family, just in a different way. And of course, that night I talked to his mom and said, hey, this is what happened. And her heart broke too. But then she goes, I'm glad that happened on your watch, because she didn't want to see the tear, right? Well, it was hard enough just hearing about it.
From the sound of it, you have the benefit of your ex at least being relatively sane, at least in these matters.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yes. Not only is she relatively sane, she is amazing. She's an amazing mother and a great co-parent. We know that our relationship didn't work out, but that didn't mean that we couldn't be great co-parents and raise an amazing young man, which we thankfully have been able to do.
And he is indeed a young man now. He's got to be at least 18, right?
19 years old. We just dropped him off at college last week.
Well, that's about the best you can hope for in terms of co-parenting with a divorced spouse, don't you think?
We hit it out of the park. When you have the ability to take your breakdown in a relationship with a person and realize that every interaction you have with them is not about you interacting with them for your own relationship with them. It's about doing what is best for your child. And what we always have thought is what's best for our child is for the child's parents not to be in conflict. So whatever you need to do to make that happen, you got to do your best. It's not always easy. We weren't dealing with mental health issues. I wasn't dealing with alcohol and drug addiction issues. There's a lot of reasons why relationships are not easy to co-parent. I had a great co-parent. I was very fortunate.
And a lot of times when it's just not going to happen the way you envision it, we as men tend to blame ourselves, even though our ex-wife just isn't in a position to be able to reciprocate for the aforementioned reasons. Either she's not with us mentally or she's subject to some kind of addiction or something else that's basically ruling her life rather than her good sense.
Or she is playing the victim card, and every interaction she has with you is going to be a negative interaction just when you say hello. She won't like the tone. She won't like how you said it. You didn't mean anything by it other than a greeting.
Well, the terrifying part there is usually when a divorce happens, it's for a good reason. Two really good, well-meaning people rarely get divorced. Now, in your case, you may have been the exception, and that's all well and good. But a lot of guys, especially given how we're hit on a daily basis with the accusation that we're toxic simply by being male or being masculine, we carry a lot of guilt for those failed transactions, even as a parent trying to peacefully co-parent with an ex-spouse when it's really her who's standing in the way. And it just doesn't seem like the courts are often our friends. You know what I mean? In those cases.
I know exactly what you mean. I deal with it every day in the court system and with my clients. But what I did after divorce, and really about what we're talking about today, is I did hard work on myself and set very clear boundaries for how I was going to protect myself and ultimately my child. But this applies to whether you're dating with or without a child after divorce, on what type of behaviors I was going to find acceptable in anyone that I was going to date.
Well, good for you. In other words, you weren't a victim because of this divorce. You said, how can I do better? How can I be better? How can I be more attractive? How can I not make whatever mistake happened the first time? How can I not recreate that mistake again?
100%. My goal was never to get divorced again, which one way to do that obviously is don't get remarried.
That's the obvious way. The leading cause of divorce is marriage, I've heard.
That's right. I am a hopeless romantic, though. I think that it is the ultimate connection between people and commitment. And I think the world treats us differently when you're married, but it just was part of my DNA. And since I knew I wanted to be married again, but not divorced again, I knew that I had to really set boundaries to be with somebody that I'm going to walk this earth with to the rest of our lives. And that's not easy to do, but it served me well. It took 13 years to get married again. To my wife's credit now, if we would have gotten married when I wanted to, I don't think it would have worked. I think the 13 years and some time away and figuring out what was really important, helping us communicate, was vitally important. And I just have some tips for your listeners if you want to get into some.
Well, you basically dovetailed the two questions I'm champing at the bit to ask together so beautifully that I almost am shell-shocked by the beauty with which you executed that, perhaps unbeknownst to you. So here is how I'm going to, I guess, position you to riff away as you will, okay? And you can have all the time you want. The floor is yours. The first question is, tell me how your dating life went after your divorce, maybe perhaps along with these boundaries that you set, what they were, how they defined you, how you improved, and how you saw the trajectory of your dating life and the quality perhaps of the women you were attracting improving. And obviously that culminated in you meeting your school-age sweetheart, who was as good, if not better than ever, which is definitely a win. The second question is, if that first one wasn't long and convoluted enough there for you, Seth, how did you get out of the friend zone with your current wife?
So let's do the first one on dating first.
Yeah, okay.
It was easy. Dating after divorce to me was easy. And the reason why it was easy is because I was never going to enter into a relationship that I was not okay with it ending. So I'm going to say that again. I was never going to go on a date or enter into a relationship that I was not okay with it ending. I was not going to be so attached to someone that I'd do anything to keep them.
So your boundary there was you weren't going to be needy.
That's right.
Clingy.
Well, my wife, I say fiance because I've been saying that so long now, but my wife always, we joke that I'm saran wrap because you can see right through me and I'm clingy because I'm the guy that wants to sit on the couch next to her. She's okay watching a movie from the other side of the couch. Okay. But I wasn't going to be needy in the sense of emotionally needy or needing to always provide or needing to always fix her problems or needing always to do the nice thing or say the right thing. I was going to be me. And if me worked for her, great. But I wasn't going to change the core of who I was to try to make somebody else happy because my job isn't to make them happy. Their job is to be responsible for their own emotional well-being. It's my job to be a supportive partner, to be who I am, to be consistent, to be an even keel, to, if I say something, do it. You know, all those things that you can control, that was my job.
Having witnessed the flotsam and jetsam of the family law system in Florida for so long, did that give you a more fine-tuned approach to all this, you think, your professional life?
Oh, yeah. I see the biggest breakdown in relationships. People ask me, what's the breakdown? It's communication. It is just flat out communication. Now, I'm taking aside, like we talked about before, mental health, addiction, all those problems. But my former spouse never once intentionally hurt me, and I never once intentionally hurt her. My current spouse, I have been hurt by her, but never intentionally, and I have hurt her, but never intentionally. What I've learned in the time when I did the hard work on myself is when my current spouse says something to me and I am hurt or behaves in such a way that I am hurt, I will just say, my chest is tight. That's my code for I'm hurt because I get really tense. Or, you know, that didn't feel really good to me. This is what I heard you say. And she will then say, oh my God, that's not what I meant. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. So we will have more sophisticated, emotionally mature conversations and not let it just slide by. Because when you slide by, that's one cut and then it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, you can say that again. In my actual divorce decree, my wife said this was the cumulative effect of all the small things he's ever done to me. Now, the difference between my first marriage and my second marriage, other than the mental illness versus lack thereof, was connection. And you're talking about this ability to communicate. that ability to communicate arises from two people getting each other. They know what's going on inside their heads. Plus, there's this essence of them not being so easily offended or so emotionally fragile. And when you have that state of affairs kind of working together, spinning on its axis correctly, then the universe tends to operate a whole lot better relative to your marriage, right?
1,000%. I couldn't agree with those statements more.
Well, I've been doing this a while.
Well, and you're good at it.
And you're doing what you're doing for a while, which gave you a clear advantage when you were dating.
Yeah. And this is another reason why I found it very easy on those boundaries is you'll be on the dating apps. You go out on a date. You're sitting at the table and they will always ask me, well, what do you do? I'm an attorney. And then they ask you, what kind of an attorney? And I say, I'm a divorce attorney. And I immediately say, but I really work hard to leave my clients' issues, legal issues and emotional issues and problems that they have at the office and then live my life when I'm not in the office.
You know, we've had people who are in the psychiatric field on this show. Several in particular, I remember the conversations. Dr. Mark Goldston was one of them, and I brought up with them, how does it go on dates when the person you're sitting across the table from finds out what you do for a living? And almost all of them played a little bit of a game of keep away. About what they do. Because as soon as someone who is a pedestrian relative to a psychiatric expert, the fears, they're just going to like blossom forth, you know, like mold and mildew. They're going to be like, oh my God, this person can see right through me. They're going to psychoanalyze me. They're going to be able to manipulate and trick and, you know, do all this Freudian crazy crap with me. And really, every one of those same psychiatric experts who have been on my show, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, said, you know, it's really just not like that. I mean, when I'm off the clock, I just want to be human and I take everybody as they come. I mean, sure, I have some insight into personality, but it's not like I'm clairvoyant and some kind of like brain wizard who could pick people apart. But it's just amazing how people fear that so massively that I almost have to kind of soft pedal it on dates. And I can only imagine the best way to hit the issue of being a divorce lawyer when you're out on a date is with a big heavy hammer. Because the first thing I'm sure someone asks you is, well, why are you divorced and dating again if you're this expert in divorce? But it's not necessarily that you're that, is it?
No, in fact, that isn't. And that was very well put in the thought that that's what I thought they would say is, well, if you're a divorce attorney, you must have seen it all. Why are you back out here? Right?
Yes.
Instead, they immediately tell me about their divorce. They immediately, and remember, I start by, I really work hard to leave work at work and be home at home, which is my big,
they can't help it, Seth.
My big, like disclaimer, don't tell me about your divorce because then it feels like I'm working.
I got another disclaimer for you. Okay. It isn't that you're a divorce lawyer necessarily. We all did that when we were divorced and dating again. The topic of one's divorce is just so lugubriously common. and you just can't stop yourself.
Absolute worst thing to bring up.
You bet it is. Oh my God.
And here's why. So they would bring it up and it always started with, oh my God, my ex was the worst. And I'm like, I hear that from every client. You know, I assure you they weren't the worst, no matter how bad they were. There's always somebody worse. There's always someone with more money. There's always someone that's taller and more attractive and more fit, right? So, but what they would immediately do on a first date is invite their former spouse into our date. Why would you do that?
Because they can't help it.
Well,
for the record, by the way, I started dating thinking, oh man, my ex, and you know the story, and these guys do too about my ex, there's no need to rehash it, was the absolute worst. Nobody is going to have more of a nightmare story than mine. And in fact, women will probably not even believe that, well, for lack of a better way to put it, I was the innocent one in my divorce after all, right? Oh, I heard worse. I heard tons worse. One woman was dragged into the cartel by her husband doing the criminal work, and then he disappeared, like Sopranos style, and never returned again. And she wasn't even allowed to date again until the courts officially acknowledged, yeah, he's probably dead at this point. I'm like, all right, Yeah, that's a pretty bad story.
Yeah, you win that one.
Yeah, I'll let you chalk that one up. But importantly, I also didn't give her a second date.
Right, of course.
Just in case so-and-so, comes back from the dead. Yeah, that would get ugly.
Smart move.
For me, yes.
So that's my first rule is you don't invite your former spouse, your ex, into your current relationship because nothing good comes of that.
And you know what? If you're dating someone who is your ex-spouse, you're probably already on the wrong track.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
If you're dating someone exactly like them and you're almost literally inviting your ex-spouse into the relationship in the form of the next woman you met, and she says things like, oh, we have so much in common, and she looks like her, etc. Oh, man, I'll tell you what. I met a woman online. This is a true story. And I like Latinas, and I like a certain facial structure. I have a type, And I met this woman, and she looked, beyond her pictures. She looked a little different than her pictures. She looked so much like a dead ringer for my ex-wife that I couldn't even.
Oh, that's a problem.
And the poor woman, it wasn't her fault at all, but she could have been almost her doppelganger. And I was just thinking this just can't. And so I told her, the typical things I would tell her at the end of a date. And she wondered what happened. And I sort of couldn't tell her, but it's just amazing. You not only look for someone who resembles your ex-wife, you look for someone who's going to feed you the same crap sandwich over and over. And we somehow default to what we're comfortable with, even though it ruined our last marriage. And I have to applaud the fact that you said, like I did, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I don't want to get divorced anymore. I absolutely cannot do what happened last time over again. History cannot repeat itself here. So I love what you're talking about. Give us some of the practical ways you turn that ship around during your dating process, prior to you meeting the woman you're married to now.
I would focus on the future, not the past. When you're dating someone, it is all about what kind of time you're going to spend together in the moment. And do you see yourself being with this person in the future? It has nothing to do with the past people you dated. Now, to your point, you don't want to date the same women over and over and over again that don't work out. Then you need to reevaluate what you're doing in selecting someone to go out with and how the boundaries and what you're going to accept and not accept in a partner. But my point is, that stuff that you are doing, it has nothing to do with the person you're dating. So when I would be on a first date, I would talk about or ask the open-ended questions like, is there some place in the world that you've always wanted to travel to that you've never been? Why? Now you're talking about the future. And some people that I would date would then just couldn't resist. And I would only have one date with them. And I would be saying, check please, as soon as I could. When they would say, I always have wanted to go to Paris because my husband never let me. Now you're looking backwards, right? I'm trying to see what you want to do in your life. What are your hopes, your dreams, your goals? And you, once again, are bringing back the past.
Were you really that draconian about it? As soon as she brought up the ex, that's it? Check, please?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Pretty much. It was a hard stop for me. And the reason for that, it's okay to say that you have a former spouse, but to go on or to blame them or to be the victim, I'm not interested in it. I work really hard at work, but I leave it at the office. I don't bring that home with me. And you're just carrying around that baggage. So if they would say something like, I've just always really wanted to go to Paris and never had the opportunity, that's different, right? That could mean my work, my finances. I was in a bad relationship that I didn't have the opportunity. We had the kids, whatever the case may be. But if they were pointing blame to somebody else, I'm not interested in the blame game.
And then we as dumbasses sit across the table and go, yeah, well, I've been there a half a dozen times. You're not missing much. And then that's when she goes, check, please.
Exactly. Exactly. And give it to him. Right?
Yeah. I figured we needed a little levity there. And I've actually overheard couples talk like that.
100%.
And she's just rolling her eyes. Yeah. Because he's just trying to brag and it's not helping. Yeah.
That's right. Look at all the stuff I've done. It's really not that good. Right.
Nobody cares. I've noticed nobody cares about anything you've ever done unless and or insofar as it serves their needs. It helps them in the moment. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah. And I think I'm saying the same thing you're saying in a different way when I tell you So you and I are friends, Scott. We just met. You've been on my podcast. I'm on yours. I had a great conversation with you and your wife. But let's be honest here. If you really think about how often I, Seth Nelson, have thought about you and your wife since our last conversation, it hasn't been that much.
Am I supposed to be offended? Because I have to kind of admit the same back at you.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the point, is we shouldn't be offended by that. People don't sit around thinking about other people in their lives all day long. They think about their own lives. We are by nature self-centered people.
You know, if you let yourself really feel into that, it's incredibly freeing. It lifts so much pressure off your shoulders. Like people who are so scared to do public speaking, if they only knew how little the audience was actually engaged in criticizing them, and perhaps tearing them down or mentally undressing them while they're on stage, it would be so much easier for everybody to do that.
Okay, we did not set this up. We did not set this up, but that leads into my exact point about dating. I did not care what the other person thought of me.
Because you have other options. Next bus, as my friend Susan Winter would say.
That's right. You have other options, but I don't put my self-worth in what other people think about me.
Plus, she's wrong for you anyway, if it's going like that.
That's right. 100%. So if you don't like me for whatever reason, and this is a true story that I am telling you, I was dating a woman. We went out 4 or 5 times. We were not exclusive. At the time, I wanted to pursue this relationship more, get to know her better. And, I was thinking about maybe we should just only date each other and not others. And we go out to eat, and she's doing a really bad job of breaking up with me.
Did you make it easier on her?
No, I don't think I did, but I tried to. And here's what I said. I said, I'm going to just repeat back what I think you're saying. So to make sure I'm communicating with you, I think you're breaking up with me, even though we're not in an exclusive relationship, but you're saying you don't want to date me anymore. Yeah, that's right. It's really me, not you. And I start laughing. And she says, what are you laughing about? And I said, let me make this easy on you. This is no big deal. She goes, what do you mean? I said, the last time I broke up with someone, I was worried about seeing my kid. I was worried about keeping the kids in the house because they were in a good school district. I was worried about how we were going to make the finances work, how we were going to make transportation work, how we were going to do X, Y, and Z. This breakup is no big deal. I like you. I would like to continue to see you and get to know you more and see if this relationship goes somewhere. But if that's not what you want, I will be upset for 24 to 48 hours. And in 6 months from now, I will not remember your name.
That's about as pragmatic as it gets.
And she was then offended. What do you mean you're not going to remember my name? And I said, what does it matter? You never want to see me again in your life. I don't understand why you are now offended.
You know why I'm laughing?
Do tell.
I'm going to tell you. Because you think like a lawyer, bro. You sound like a lawyer. You think you're keeping this at work, but you're bringing it. I mean, it's just who you are. That's why you're a good lawyer, because that's who you are.
Right,
it's a cart and a horse, really. Yeah, but I mean, it's a cart and a horse, really. I mean, you're a good lawyer because it's not like you're bringing your baggage from work with you. It's just that's who you are, and it's the way it's got to be, and it's cut and dried, and that's the language you speak. And yeah, isn't it crazy how this woman, she's such a drama queen that she almost needed you to give her this big, awesome production of, oh, no, don't leave me, please, don't, just to help assuage her ego or something, which is something we as men are usually accused of. But nay, oh boy, women can be affected by that bug as well. It's incredibly common. They need attention. They need to be validated, even as they're invalidating you. It's crazy.
It is bizarre. I will never forget the date. And to this day, I cannot tell you what she looked like, and I do not remember her name. But to your point that I do bring my work home with me.
Well, I mean, I said it a little.
No,
I caught myself a little bit. I put a safety net under there for you.
Scott, I hear you, but you're going to appreciate this. I was in, let's call it a disagreement with my spouse, my current spouse. And she says, when we get in an argument, I feel like you're deposing me.
I was going to say, if I were her, I would go, so sue me. That's what I would say.
Right, exactly. You. Yeah. And I told her, well, I wouldn't have to depose you if you just answer the question. Right?
Well, I mean, military officers, come home and order their kids around. Women who are kindergarten teachers come home and woman-splain their husband through basic tasks. I mean, it's like we can't help it. It's like we're, passed the Enneagram test and landed in the profession we're supposed to be in. I mean, What are you going to do? Hold that against us?
No, I will share this with you. My first spouse is a brilliant attorney. She was top of her law school class. My second spouse got her LLM in tax, which in the legal world, you get your Juris Doctor first and then you get your master's. So when people have their LLM, they know what they're doing. And she got it at NYU, the top LLM tax school in the nation. So these are very smart women. And the fact that they think I can outduel them in a debate, I would have to disagree with that one. But that brings up a point about dating and when you talk about your former spouse. First off, I would recommend everyone refer to their former spouse as their former spouse and not ex-wife.
Well, don't call her your wife either, especially if you're newly divorced. I let that one slip a few times.
It has.
It wasn't pretty. Yeah.
Correct. But ex, in my mind, has a derogatory connotation. And if you say former spouse, it's just more respectful.
On a related note, what is the richest man in the world thinking by renaming Twitter X for that exact same reason?
Listen, we have I think the X is amazing, and we have a little coaster at home that says, "Dear algebra, stop looking for X. She's not coming back."
Beautiful. And stop asking why too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
see what I did there?
I got you. X and Y. I was with you. It was subtle, but I liked it.
That's a good plug for my company, which, as I speak completely hypocritically now, is X and Y Communications. But that's chromosomal. That's not canceling things.
I love it. I love it.
That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
You should, and double down on it. It works.
All right, so how did you get out of the just be friends zone with the chick? Tell us, man.
We started talking. We started talking on the phone, and it was like a Thursday night that we ran into each other. And, remember, she was still going through a divorce. Now, it was basically all done. They were just waiting for the paperwork to be finished, and they were getting along, and everything was good with the kids. But like I said, we were talking on the phone like teenagers used to do, and we were going to have lunch together. And I said to her, I got this question to ask you, and it's just going to be open, honest, and vulnerable. Is Monday a date? And I said, but before she could answer, I said, but it's okay if it's not, because if you're not ready, I'm trying to be very gentlemanly and respectful of where she is in this divorce process, and emotionally, is she ready to date? And she goes, well, that's how every girl wants to be asked out. It's okay if it's not. And I just start laughing, and it turns out that it was a date. But the reason we had to ultimately define it is because we had just known each other forever, and we were obviously going to just get together as friends, and that was the intent. But if she was on this show, she would tell you, Scott, you're not telling the full story. So here's the full story. When we first ran into each other on that Thursday night, I said, well, if you ever want to get together, have coffee or grab a drink, let me know. And she goes, yeah, that would be great. How about next Thursday? And Scott, I said, I got plans. And she goes, okay, how about the Thursday after that? And I'm like, oh, I think I got something that night. And she goes, okay, how about the next Thursday? And I'm like, I might have something then too. And she thought, this guy has no interest in even hanging out as friends. Like, she wasn't even thinking about dating me.
Well, that would be the message you sent there pretty clearly.
Pretty clearly. So we start talking on the phone. And then I say to her after the Monday date, hey, do you want to get together on Thursday night? What I didn't know at the time is that she lived on the north end of town. Her son had acting lessons in a performance on the south end of town. So she would have to drive him there, and she would have like 2 to 3 hours to kill every Thursday night, because it didn't make sense to drive all the way back north just to come south. So she would have some time to kill. What she didn't know about me is I never had my child on Thursday night. He was always with his mom. Scott, I had dates lined up on Thursday night weeks in advance. I literally had 3 separate dates on 3 separate Thursdays with 3 separate women all the way out. And so when I said, hey, you want to get together on Thursday night? She goes, oh, I thought you had plans. I'm like, oh yeah, those, I canceled those. And then the next Thursday, you want to get together on Thursday? She said, I thought you had plans. No, those canceled. And literally she goes, what was the deal with Thursday? And then I told her. So I got some credit for canceling all these dates before we ever even had our first date.
Now that's seduction at its finest, I have to tell you.
Well, I don't know if it's at its finest, but it worked.
You know, I'm reminded of when I met Emily. She and I were both going on lots of dates like that. And once I met her and went out with her a few times, I suddenly just didn't have the need for any of those other women to go out with anymore. Right. I guess that's what you're basically saying is you did a little reprioritization in your life.
Real quick.
Yes.
Because remember, I had a crush on her, not the entire time, but certainly from grade school. But really, when we started talking as adults, I was like, there's some real substance here. And let's just inject money for a moment, because money is power. There is issues with money in all relationships, and people have the hardest time talking about money, even with their spouse, talking about sex, even with their spouse. And we had a money conversation very early on in our relationship because I was newly divorced. I took on all the debt that I could possibly take from the marriage to leave my former spouse in the house with the kids because they need to stay in that good school district, which meant I didn't have any money. I had just recently started my own law practice. So everything was going back into the practice and everything was going to support my son and to do everything I could for him. I did not have money for fancy dinners, to go on trips, to do any of that. And I made that very clear very early on. And I did that with other women before my current spouse, and they were gone because I got the feeling like, oh, they were looking for me to pay for everything. They didn't want a partnership. They wanted someone to pay. Like I was looking for an equal partner, right? And we were dating, and she goes, well, I have a question for you. I said, sure, what's your question? She goes, do you have any objection if we go out to a nice meal and I pay? I said, no. And she kind of looked at me, and I said, what? You kind of have a confused look. She goes, no, I really appreciate that, because why should I stay home and be with you, even though I want to be with you, but I want to go out for a nice meal just because you can't have the ability at this time to pay for dinner? I want to go out. And if you're not man enough to let a woman buy you dinner because she wants to go out to a nice dinner with you, then I'm really not interested. So that was very open, honest, and vulnerable. And here we are 13 years later. The law firm's doing great, sending my son off to college. We got all this stuff going on. And my financial position is dramatically different than it was 13 years ago. A lot of hard work that got me here. A lot of other people have helped along the way with great team members at my firm and whatnot. But being open, honest, and vulnerable about money and having those discussions, I think also really took a lot of stress off of a potential stressful situation.
You know, I think, Seth, a lot of guys are listening to this and it all sounds very counterintuitive to them, especially guys who maybe are recently divorced and they feel like their former spouse, not their ex, took them to the cleaners in the family law system, and that's why they're broke as a joke. And they have this fear, perhaps driven by what they've read on the internet and been told to expect, that all women care about is whether you're going to provide for them, whether you have a whole lot of money. And if you don't, if you're broke as a joke or just recently divorced and pulling it back together as you did, they're not going to have any interest in you at all. And you're saying a lot of those women did, but when you found the right woman for whom that wasn't an issue, it was indeed that. It wasn't a factor at all. A lot of guys are probably also thinking, well, wait a minute, how did this guy get set up on so many dates rapid fire without having that advantage at the ready to entice women with to go on those set dates? And what I want to interject here, you talk about interjecting money. I want to interject here that guys, if you're interesting and you make a woman feel a certain way, you make her feel safe and comfortable, and you're charming and you act like a man, it's amazing how these old wives' tales, especially when you hear them from bitter, jaded guys like the Men Going Their Own Way, who I like to harp on. It's one of my soapboxes, by the way, is that whole movement. I just think it's a bunch of guys entering into a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're bitching and complaining, and women just find that completely unattractive. So, of course, women don't like them. But if you're this guy who actually likes women, as I think you are, first of all, you got a huge advantage right there, because most people nowadays can't even stand the people they're trying to mate with and procreate with. It's really weird. But if you have this mindset that, hey, men and women actually are designed to be in partnership together, despite the fact that my first marriage didn't work out, I still believe in that inherent fact, then women are going to perk up because they're going to have a guy who they think is on their side, who they sense is on their side, I should say, early on. And then when you treat them with respect and you make them laugh a little bit and you're fun and interesting, and dare I say, to kind of recall something we were talking about earlier, someone who actually cares about them, because to quote Teddy Roosevelt, nobody really cares how much you know until they know how much you care, which kind of encapsulates everything we were talking about before on that subject. All of a sudden, they still want to meet with you. They're still attracted to you because you're making them feel a certain way, and it's irresistible to them.
And none of this is a fancy restaurant. Like, I had dates lined up, but I didn't tell you we were going to like steakhouses and ordering, Dom Perignon. It was, hey, do you want to get together and go to a movie? Do you want to get together and have an early dinner and then go for a walk?
My wife and I met at IHOP for breakfast.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah, you got it.
So in doing that, to basically say, this is not what I'm about at this time, that did a couple things for me. One, it alleviated any pressure to feel like I needed to provide or do all this stuff. It also showed me that the person that I was dating, buying her things is not, we've all read the 5 languages of love, but that was never an issue for her. She goes, if I want to buy something, I'll buy something for myself.
Plus, there's more to being a provider as a man than being an ATM machine.
That's right.
There are other things you can provide. Yeah.
That's right. So I think that was that. The other thing that I think, and the reason why I would go on dates or get dates or people would find me attractive in whatever words you want to use, is how I treated my former spouse. I didn't bash them. I was with my current spouse for about 5 years before I said anything that was even partially considered negative. And when I said it, I was dating at the time, and she goes, oh my God, what? And I'm like, what? And she goes, that's the first time since we've been dating that I heard you say anything that could be perceived as negative about your former spouse. And it was something stupid about like driving or, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I said that. I should have never done that. I felt horrible. But the point of that is, when you're on a date and you start bashing your ex, I'm going to say ex now to be derogatory, that woman that you're dating is like, is this how he's going to treat me? Or maybe I was in that situation. And it's just playing out in a manner that is only bad. And it's not like I went on and on about how great my former spouse was, but I would, if she did something great for her kid, I would mention it.
Yeah, but you're soft pedaling it otherwise because you don't want to be dwelling on that anyway.
Correct.
Yeah. I will add a little bit of an aside to what you're saying. That's how it should be with your kids too. If she wants to badmouth me and tell lies about me, great. And you know what? I will not be walked all over like a carpet. That is different than what I'm talking about. But I'm not going to engage in badmouthing my kid's mother, and especially in telling lies about her to him in a weird, sordid attempt to curry favor, because I want to believe with all my heart and soul that it's going to backfire.
It will.
You know what I mean? And
I've
plus,
seen it.
It's about my character anyway. And what kind of man am I?
And it will. And on that front, your kids figure it out, and you're only harming your own relationship. And they are not going to define their relationship with you based on what your spouse tells them. They're going to define that relationship on how you treat them and how you treat their mother. And the reverse is true. They're going to evaluate their relationship with their mother on how their mother treats them and how their mother speaks about you.
Fantastic conversation. His name is Seth Nelson. He is with NLG Divorce and Family Law in the Tampa St. Pete metro area. He is also the host of a wonderful, fun podcast called How to Split a Toaster, as if a show about divorce can possibly be any fun. But hey, then again, we've had some fun here today, right? And when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Seth, you will be magically transported to his website where you can learn more about him, his practice, and what he's got going on over at NLG Divorce and Family Law. Seth Nelson, what a wonderful conversation that took some unexpected twists and turns. And I got to tell you, here's a little secret. Those kind of shows are usually the best shows. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you and your listeners. And I think you're doing great work and helping a lot of people. It's just a real honor to be a small part of that.
Well, thank you, man. And you know what? I always love talking to family law attorneys who actually are ethical and mean well. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, too, because, man, there sure are a lot of them out there who are hard to trust. So thank you for being a beacon out there for these guys as well. And listen, gentlemen, if you haven't been to MountainTopPodcast.com lately, there's still that open opportunity for you to get on my calendar and talk to me for free for 25 minutes about what you've got going on. Hey, listen, maybe you're recently divorced. Maybe it's been too long since you've been divorced. And hearing Seth and I talk about all the dates we lined up prior to finding the right woman really just kind of pissed you off a little bit. Well, why don't you take that energy and turn it into empowerment? Let's talk about how we can get the right woman in your life once and for all. Listen, guys, Seth and I were where you are. It's not like we're better than you. It's not like we're somehow blessed compared to you guys. The reason why both he and I do what we do respectively in this life is because we've been there. We've seen the light at the end of the tunnel and we've walked through it, and we want the same for you. So finally, get on my phone. Let's talk for 25 minutes free. It won't cost you a dime. I'll be exactly who you expect me to be. Hey, my passport says Scot McKay on it, and that is who I am. And I look forward to talking to you. I always appreciate each and every one of you guys who I talk to either on the phone or Zoom. And, man, I guarantee some result in advance simply for taking the time. And I respect you guys for taking a big step forth and saying, hey, you know what? Let's get this part of my life handled. You can get on my calendar at MountainTopPodcast.com. While you're there, also check out our sponsors, as always, Jocko Willink's Company Origin in Maine, the Keyport, and also Hero Soap. When you get something from any of our fine sponsors, please use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 to get an extra 10% off. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scot McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.